Recording in progress. Very intimidating. That happened before every one of our meetings, right, Sean?
It does, yep. It's a scary voice.
Andrew, I love Canada. What part of Canada are you in right now?
I'm in Toronto.
Yeah, right on. Love it.
One of the good parts, but there's not many bad parts, if you ask me.
Well, they make a lot of films there. So I made a TV series, and I made one of those hideous Alvin and the Chipmunk films there. And I loved it.
Well, talking about making Kung Fu Panda 4, Mike, the first thing I'm curious about is how do you come into it to preserve the style of the franchise and that whole theme while also evolving everything and trying to inject, obviously, new styles and energy?
What made it easy was working with Sean and his team. So coming in, we really didn't want to, it's such a beloved franchise. It's one of my favorite franchises ever. And that's not just based on how great the villains are and how funny Jack Black is. It's the look. It's got this beautiful look to it. So we wanted to keep with that look, but it was really workshopping it with Sean and our production designer, Sean's team, and our production designer, Paul Duncan, to really come up with what is some extra things we could do, but still stay in that world.
Yeah, my main job was I didn't want to screw it up. So the Hoka was the same for the first 3 films, and I was the first time Hoka on Kung Fu Panda 4. So we went back and we watched the original films and just made sure we're living up to what was done previously, and we wanted to make the fans happy.
Well, Sean, sticking with you, I understand there's a lot of work going into the moves and how Poe and all the characters move. Can you explain how that worked and what that was like?
Yeah, that was the biggest challenge, doing all the fight scenes. We had a lot of help. One, I'm a black belt in Taekwondo, so this was my dream come true to be able to have animation and fighting and martial arts. But we also had a really good fight choreographer that helped us. His name was Don Tai Theorthata, and he worked with a lot of live action films. He worked on The Gray Man, and he's worked with Jean-Claude Van Damme, who's a hero of mine. So it was awesome getting to work with him. So what we would do is Mike and Steph and myself, we would all kind of work with Don, show him a sequence. We would send him the animatic and work out some of the fight moves. And then he and his team would shoot the best live action reference we've ever seen. Slow motion, multiple angles, really fun stuff. And then that was a really good stepping stone. And then from there, we would talk to Mike, talk about what we liked, what we didn't like. And then we had this other guy, Philippe Lebrun, who was our 2D fight choreographer. And then what he would do is 2D animate almost the entire sequence and really figure out the moves. And he worked on the first 3 Kung Fu Pandas. So he was really fluent in Kung Fu. And then that's how we would start off every sequence, with live action reference and then 2D fight choreography. It was awesome.
Yeah, can I just say the 2 fascinating things about that is, one, the stunt choreographer, he cast this big giant guy as Kung Fu Panda, and he was shaped like Kung Fu Panda, which was interesting. And then, Sean, I don't know if this was your idea or you suggested it to him, but they even put on ears and wore tails, like a fox tail, so the animator could see when they're doing these cool moves how the tail would follow through. So that was interesting. And then I also, it was my favorite part of this job was I called it mixing old school with new school. We actually saved time and were more decisive by going back and having Philippe it was Philippe and 2 other of our animators hand draw, like pencil and paper, like the good old days of animation. And we would work it out with pencil and paper. And there was also a loose quality to it. It was very sketchy and loose, and it helped evolve it to become something better than I've seen in the previous Kung Fu Panda films once we took it over into the CGI. So that was one of my favorite things. That mix, going back in time to be more futuristic looking, was insane.
No, we had 2 other guys, that Mike had mentioned. Ludo Buoncho, who was our lead on the Chameleon, and he was a really good 2D animator as well. And then Julian Bilkeville. So a lot of times before we had a rig, we couldn't even animate it in the computer yet. We would just jump into 2D and just kind of figure out things, especially with the Chameleon. Like, we had no idea how she was going to transform, how she was going to even move with her dress. So we did some 2D tests first just to kind of figure it all out. And then it informed the other departments moving forward.
That's right. So mostly with action fight sequences and our Chameleon transformation, we would work it out with pencil and paper first.
That's so cool because, obviously the origins of animation go back to a lot of reference work, and we still have that, obviously, but it sounds like you guys really went above and beyond in terms of reference work. That's amazing.
Well, it's so funny. I was just talking about this at dinner last night. When Disney did it, he'd have to set up lights and hire actors and costumes and stuff. And now some of the people on Sean's team, they just videotape themselves in their office 3 times and they shrink themselves down and they just like you almost see it all worked out before they even start to animate it. It's the funniest thing. We live in the future. It's like they just do it on their phones, you know?
That was my favorite. Was we would show the reference to Mike and Dailies almost as like a blocking. And there's this one guy, Justin Weg, who would shoot the funniest reference. And there was a scene where he was shooting himself as Zhen in a cart in like a prison, and he shot it in his shower.
Yeah,
remember that, Mike?
Disturbing. Yeah, and if he's playing like a bunny bartender, you'd see him 3 times as Poe, as a pelican, and then shrunk down tiny as a bunny bartender. You're like, wow, you got all the characters there. It's a one-man show in his bathroom. Bizarre.
So funny.
That's amazing. So what goes into working with Jack Black and this whole cast of amazing people and channeling that performance into the characters? What does that take?
Well, it takes with Jack Black. It takes very little to channel him into Poe. He is Poe. He is a fanboy. He's very funny. He could do high kicks and kung fu himself. That part was easy.
Yeah, we would when he came into the recording studio, we have a little lipstick cam that shoots reference of him, and we would always look at that. Some actors, you know, they're really just trying to make their voice do what it needs to do, and they don't move at all. That's not Jack. Jack, his face gets into, like, we could just copy the reference verbatim sometimes, and it worked perfectly. And he gets really into it. He's like sweating by the end of the session. He's amazing. Yeah, it didn't take a lot.
Awkwafina's performance too, her face kind of informed the design almost of the Fox character. We started to bend that Fox towards her facial expressions. Same with the Chameleon with Viola Davis. Like there's a few faces she made that it looks like you guys mimicked beautifully in the animation. And then I remember you guys really referenced Bryan Cranston when he came in when he came back into the tavern pretending that he was a tough guy. There was a lot of moves from Cranston that he was doing behind the microphone that ended up in our film. That was neat.
Oh my God. Yeah. His facial expressions were amazing. And he did a lot of really just nice, like little head accents that we would just, like I said, exactly steal, copy it almost verbatim because the acting was so good. Yeah,
you didn't steal him. It was an homage. It was an homage to his performance.
Paying tribute to his performance.
Yes, paying tribute. No stealing.
In my frame.
Well, the last thing I want to know is, what do you think is the most misunderstood thing about animation, especially which takes so much longer than, say, an animated TV series, which, no offense to the TV shows, but it is a different beast.
I was just going to say, from my point of view, because I've directed live action and animation is much more difficult because you're directing again and again and again. You direct the voices and then the movement and then the design and the animation. So it's almost directing broken down into like 1,000 different pieces. But the most frustrating thing is no one knows how a movie is directed, so they just assume it's not directed. It's like the devil's magic, I guess. Same with animation. I don't know how Sean does it, and it's just like, well, it must just be the devil's magic. I guess he just like does some incantations and does a poem to the moon, and then the beautiful sequence is done with the chameleon transforming.
That's exactly right.
It's so much technology that I think people assume that there's not a lot of work to it, and it's quite the opposite. There's loads of work.
Yeah, when my wife first met me, she's not in the industry at all. She had no idea how hard it was to do what we do, like how many hours it is and how painstaking it is. But I'm always impressed with what Mike does, because when we're on a shot, sometimes we'll be on a shot for 3 weeks to a month if it's a really long shot. So you're looking at the same thing over and over and over, and you kind of lose sight of it. It's like you can't tell which way is up or down. And then with Mike, we're only on the shot for a month. He's on the movie for like 3-4 years. So he's looking at many versions, the same shot, and especially with like a joke. It's like the joke was funny 5 times ago. Now
no one's laughing.
Yeah. It's like, how do you keep that in your head and know, look, originally this was funny, maybe it's still funny, But I'm always impressed with how Mike can just like watch the movie over and over and still stay fresh to it.
It's because I'm so needy for a laugh, Sean, that when I first hear that laugh, it's just like filling my soul. So I remember it like
hold on to it
because I'm so broken. I remember it for years later. Anyway, Andrew,
amazing work, really. Congratulations.
Thanks. And thank you so much for promoting our film, man. We work so hard on this. Like Sean said, it takes 3 years to make it. So thank you for getting people excited to want to see it and have it and own it. So thank you.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you for the time.